Greetings, assessment friends. It's Dr. Ryder, Andy. I am coming at you here from beautiful Plano, Texas, or what kind of feels a little bit like Mayfair. If Mayfair were larger, had a park with a nice pond, and kind of more upscale luxury shopping in the middle of it. It's very much kind of this Mayfairish type place where I am last night, today, and on Saturday. As I was on my way here to Plano, I got a glimpse of this really fantastic sky outside of my window somewhere, I think, over Louisiana. And it occurred to me that I wanted to follow up with you all about a couple of things from Wednesday evening. One is this idea of research versus assessment, and how that plays out with respect to the data analysis that you should be gearing up for if you're not already doing it with respect to your assessment projects. And so I just wanted to hit upon a couple of points. Some of these will feel a little redundant from the other night or other things that I've said, but I just want to make sure that you have a clear sense of what I mean here when I talk about these things. With respect to qualitative data that you get in terms of research, with qualitative research, we're typically looking at doing this sort of robust analysis of our qualitative data that we've perhaps gotten from interviews or focus groups. Those are usually, not usually, they're always transcribed and kind of poured over repeatedly for the purpose of analysis. We might be looking at documents such as websites or publications or memoranda that an organization might issue, observations of activities that might occur, photographs, anything that might kind of have text or visual representations of text or that might be considered data. And our robust analysis of this typically occurs over multiple, and by multiple I mean 3+ rounds of coding and analysis where we notice smaller data points and kind of comb through them, and they accrete or combine to form slightly larger categories, and those larger categories then combine to form themes. And through all of this we identify, it's a process of identifying patterns for looking at underlying meaning. Now with qualitative assessment work, we're typically also concerned with analysis of text data, so open-ended survey data, or focus group or interviews. We may or may not transcribe those focus groups or interviews, but we'll do usually a couple of rounds of the review of data. And when we do that in groups, we're looking to kind of see if we can't come to some sort of an agreement, doing the data review individually, but then coming together to kind of see what we identified as part of the data analysis. And we focus in assessment at least on those ideas that pop up a lot. What those ideas that occur or that come up on multiple occasions, what do those sorts of things indicate beyond just the idea itself? We're looking more so for yes, some things might get said frequently, but what does that mean? What does that tell us? And I've got an example here on the next slide. But it's important, as I've said before in this class and in other occasions with you, that we not ignore those things that pop up less frequently, or those things that aren't said, because even something that's only said by one or two people might be a really important idea that we should highlight, or that we would want to highlight, because it may just be a particularly good point and particularly relevant to the matter of the assessment. And we also tend to kind of go into assessment expecting to see certain outcomes or certain findings based on the context in which we're conducting the assessment, or what the literature might tell us that we should expect. And if that's not the case, that could be an indication that something isn't quite right, that something is uniquely different about this particular context with the people who we've talked to. But it's important to note those kinds of things as well, because oftentimes, if we have expectations going in and they're not met, or we don't find them, it's typically is cause for further analysis or further consideration. So you want to look at that. My example in terms of, this idea of things that are said really frequently, and this is a real life example from this course a few semesters ago. The question was something along the lines of, what are the two most important things that you learned about leading a student organization? And this is through some leadership training that's done by CAKE, the Center for Activities, or the Campus Activities and Involvement Center. And some of the bullet points from this particular survey: timing of officer transitions, need to plan for new officers, resources for parliamentary procedure, where to get help in preparing our budget, how to host a transitions meeting, finance paperwork, and expectations. So you can see right away that, a lot of people were really focused on officer transitions. So you might say that, officer transitions were something that was really important. And then assistance in preparing, budget or some financial expectations. These things popped up pretty frequently. And, beyond simply saying officer transitions and financial paperwork, one of the findings here that you might kind of accrue or kind of group these things up into a larger perspective is this, this idea of, and you can also include parliamentary procedure in here too. It's, procedural leadership. Issues of procedural leadership can be really important for people who are just getting started in leading a student organization. So the procedures around the transitions process and how to plan for that, particularly if you're going to be a new officer yourself, parliamentary procedure, and finances. So, so that's an example of that as well. It's probably a little bit more illustrative and more informative to focus on the aspects of transitions and budget, but you can easily see how that might be part of this larger trend in the data that might indicate some of the more technical pieces around procedural leadership. We talked about quantitative data the other night, and I used the examples of some of the assessment reports that Dr. Mock had shared, as well as the Northern Illinois University report. So I want to touch a bit on quantitative data here again as well. With quantitative research, we typically do so if we're doing survey research. We have some instruments that we have tested rigorously to determine their validity and reliability. And in the analysis end, we're using inferential statistics. To model outcomes, which would be called dependent variables in stats speak, with a set of predictors or independent variables. So this idea of inferential statistics are statistics that we can use to infer our findings to a broader population. Kind of typically is going to be beyond the people that we've conducted the survey with, particularly in an assessment setting, which we know is very contextualized to the site of the assessment. But in research, we're typically looking to make generalizations to a much larger group of people. And we do so by being pretty careful about who we ask and creating a good sample that we can then use to generalize our results to others. With quantitative assessment, apologies for the error here. With quantitative assessment, we've got instruments that we've designed with a specific context in mind, and we might do some basic testing of our questions. And our analysis is really going to be focused on what we might see through frequencies, or what a percentage of people who indicated a specific result on an item, or doing some basic descriptive statistics such as means or averages or mode values. And I've talked with one group already that we would typically use mode, and the mode is the result or the answer that's given most frequently if you have a particularly small group of people who have responded to a survey. So typically 10 or less, it might be more illustrative to report the mode. And it can be really interesting if you have, say, 6 people who said one thing and 4 people who said something else. Might be kind of more so bimodal, but you could report those two values. In terms of quantitative analysis, we looked at a lot of things the other night that were percentages or frequencies. So, that's certainly something that you can do. So there's this example here from the campus safety survey. And I had made the point that if you're going to do group comparisons, have a reason to do the comparisons that are typically going to be related to the purpose of your assessment project or the assessment questions that you've asked. And so then there's a table over here for these frequencies on campus safety, and then questions over here about responses on an item. I'm worried about being able to afford college, that were disaggregated by student respondents overall. So the overall percentage, 58.3%. Students who had a higher income level, which would have been over $150,000 a year for their parents or families, 30.1% reported that. And then everyone else, middle income, so 40,000 to 150,000, and that's an income distribution that's based on some other research around income inequality. 58.5, lower income below $40,000, certainly very high. And students who report receiving no family support, so they're independent students, also considerably worried. But there's a reason, to look at worry over ability to afford college. Affordability kind of maps pretty easily to issues of income. And so you can see why you might separate it out by income status there. So you just want to make sure that you've got a reason when you do those sorts of comparisons. As you think about how to organize your results and for your presentation, very simply, your results should answer your assessment questions. And because you might have 3 assessment questions, or maybe you only have 2, the puzzle pieces here kind of represent that. But the questions are a great organizer for reporting what your findings or what your results are. So you could just simply go question by question and then group the data that you have by assessment question. You in your proposals provided that table of kind of where you were mapping your assessment questions to some of the items that you were asking about in your data collection process. So that's something that you could return to and would be useful to you in preparing your results. And what you might find is that you have assessment questions where the data really fits well that you've collected, and you might have some items or some questions that you asked as part of the assessment where maybe you kind of realize this doesn't really fit, this doesn't really seem to do a very good job of answering our assessment question. So I would challenge you to report those results where they best fit. And if you've got some things that you asked on your assessments, either through a survey or focus group or interviews or what have you, that just don't fit, don't worry about them. You can set that aside. You can keep that as part of the raw data that you might have for your assessment. But not everything always makes it into the final report. So that's just a little bit of my my thinking, a little bit of some things that I wanted to share with you, just thinking about on my trip out here. So I hope that's helpful. And I will look forward to seeing you all next week when I'm around campus, and the week after that when we're back in class. Take care.